All right. Well, we were struggling to come up with a movie this week. I mean, the movie we chose, we'll talk about in a second. But as I was watching this movie, I thought, God damn, this would have been a fun freaking conversation. So I encourage you guys to watch this movie if you haven't already. It is streaming right now on Max. It is a documentary called BS High. And it is
I've
the
heard of that.
true story of a prep high school football program called Bishop Sycamore that played IMG Academy on ESPN in August of 2021, and it turned out
Yep.
they lost. They were blown out, and it turned out they were not a real school. There's the Bishop Sycamore did not exist, and so the documentary kind of looks at the coach of the program. His name is Roy Johnson, and he's sort of like a mixture of I wrote down Harold Hill and the Music Man meets Bradley Cooper in Nightmare Alley with some very Trumpian characteristics. He says at one point in the movie that he's the most honest liar anyone's ever met, because he'll be honest about him lying, and he lied a lot in order to pull the strings to make this happen. And he also has a line about how he really he seems sincerely subversive in the movie about his attempts to try to coordinate this prep football team. But he says that it's really hard to tell the difference between heart and ego. And as the movie goes along, it becomes pretty clear that this guy's a sociopath. At one point, they talk about how he made his team of high schoolers basically play 2 games in 3 days. They were all broke. They lost a lot of money. They were not eating well. They were not taken care of at all. It was pretty horrible conditions. And so the movie's interesting because it has this kind of, this question. Roy Johnson appears in the movie, and he's ostensibly the star of it. But it's just a portrait of a guy who is just completely a sociopath. There's no other way of explaining it. And you see the charm, you see the charisma, and you can see why these young men would be invested in. But you can also see why this program was non-existent, and also why ESPN would fall for it. It's a fascinating movie. It does kind of tread into bigger questions about high school athletics and football in general, and how it's all basically business, and the whole academic side of it is all just BS. It's a good movie. The special shout out of this movie, the story editor is named Mary Pallon, who went to high school a year above me at Churchill High. Go Lancers, go Bears, go Lancers. And it's a good movie. I liked it. I wish it had maybe been more of like an 8-part ESPN series like OJ or like Michael Jordan, because I think there's a lot of areas. Basically, any program that has a athletics component to it is bullshit, because there's a contradiction. You want to do well on the football field more. It's more important than having a 4.0 GPA. So that inherent contradiction is like brought up in the movie. I wish it had been more fully explored, but this guy's a maniac, and it's a fascinating story. So I give it 3 stars. It's a fascinating watch, and I encourage you guys to watch it. I'm sure you'll have lots of thoughts about it after you watch it, like I do. It's a
I mean, I remember when this happened. It's not. I don't know how much I could learn from it. I remember like hearing about this for weeks when it happened. So
I didn't know about it. It was news to me.
It's made by the guy who made the worst movie ever to win an Academy Award, Two Distant Strangers. So that's interesting.
Okay.
It has some big names on it. I think Todd Phillips was a producer, as was Michael Strahan.
I've heard of the story. I've heard of the documentary, but I didn't realize the documentary was about that story. So I'm just gonna throw that out there.
Yeah, it's also it's one of the, like, there's been a few movies, like a few documentaries like this last year's, like the Fire Festival documentaries. Like it's kind of in that territory about, even if you're not a football fan, it's kind of fascinating as like a psychological study about, again, a charismatic psychopath who's able to convince people that he has a lot more. It's like that Inventing Anna series too. I was reminded of that. Like, these people are just grifters, and we live in the Trumpian universe where anybody with that sort of mentality, just that people believe them because they're just full of charisma, I guess. So I think it's more fascinating as a character study rather than a look at the sports propaganda complex. But it's a cool movie. I liked it.
All right.
It makes ESPN look pretty dumb.
Well, that's not that hard to do.